Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for taking time out of your busy day to join us. It looks like it's the top of the hour, so we can go ahead and begin today's session. My name is Amelia Lewis, your moderator for today's session. I would like to welcome everyone to our webinar on the NIST Special Publication 853, Revision 5, and its guidance on penetration testing best practices. We are so excited to begin. Just a few logistics before getting started. All attendees will be muted throughout the session. This session is being recorded, and each attendee will receive a link to the recording, as well as a copy to the slides in your inbox tomorrow. Let's get into a little bit about KirkpatrickPrice before introducing today's speaker. KirkpatrickPrice is an information security auditing firm employing technologists to conduct internal controlled examinations, advanced penetration testing, and other compliance assessments. As a licensed CPA firm, we provide high-quality assurance services to over 1,000 clients in 49 states. Come on, Wyoming. We commonly perform assessments, audits, and penetration tests driven by frameworks such as SOC 1, SOC 2, SOC for Cybersecurity, PCI DSS, HIPAA, HITRUST CSF, GDPR, CCPA, ISO 2700, and NIST security and privacy requirements. At KirkpatrickPrice, we offer services on information security services such as audits, advanced penetration testing, and readiness and guidance. We would like to encourage you to connect with us by subscribing to our blog, visiting our webinar library so that you can watch any webinar on demand at any time, subscribing to our YouTube channel, as well as following us on LinkedIn and Twitter. And with that, I'm pleased to welcome our speaker to you today. As founder and president of KirkpatrickPrice, Joseph Kirkpatrick has spent over a decade developing the firm into the world-class industry leader it is today. Joseph was the firm's first penetration tester. While delivering our assurance services, he has enjoyed educating, empowering, and inspiring our clients by navigating them through the complex maze of security frameworks and regulatory compliance. He believes that we should all constantly strengthen our defenses and be ready for the next attack. Joseph holds the CPA, CISSP, CISA, CGEIT, CRISC, and QSA certifications. Let's begin. Welcome, Joseph.
Thanks a lot, Amelia. I appreciate everybody joining us today to talk through these changes that have come out of the NIST Special Publication 853. We're focusing on penetration testing today, and so what can we get out of the updates from Revision 5 that could improve and enhance the way we conduct penetration testing? What best practices do we find in this publication? And I'm going to give you a few specific ideas about how you can level up the security testing at your organization. So looking forward to covering all these things with you today. So we're going to focus on what's new with NIST and some of these expectations around penetration testing. And when you look at what NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, says about why they updated it, it really is very relevant to what's going on in the world today, as we are all very concerned about the frequency and intensity of the attacks against not only our nation's infrastructure, but our businesses and us personally. I really don't think there's anyone anymore that hasn't been affected from some type of a data breach resulting from an attack from a malicious individual or software application that's attacking us. And so why is it that these frameworks should be updated, and why should we put more thought into how we are performing testing on our organizations? We're going to pull a few statistics from this Forbes article where they talk about the state of cybersecurity today. And they said that 66% of Americans expect a significant cyber attack on the nation's infrastructure. This is just where we are now. We, as security professionals, we would always talk about the risk to our electric grid, our water supply, our food supply, our hospitals. We always thought about the things that were going to happen someday. And really in the last couple of years, all these things have happened now. And it's been on a scale that everyone is aware of it. Grandparents are aware of it. There really aren't very many people who don't know about some of the largest attacks that have affected these kinds of critical supply chains and utilities and things like that. And so it's very much on our minds. And so 2/3 of us expect it to get worse. We think that, yeah, there is going to be something bigger that happens down the road. 36% of Americans are not confident in who they do business with. And I think this should be much higher. I am a very healthy, paranoid person. I just assume when I'm doing business with someone that they are not protecting my data. They are not thinking through all the privacy implications sometimes in managing my data. And I just assume that going in. And a lot of that comes from having done lots of information security audits and seeing, what types of practices are normal out there. But, we hesitate doing business with people, or we have to do business with them, but sometimes we're concerned about the information that we're giving them. Over the last 2 years, I've had many more trips to the walk-in clinic than I've ever had in my life because of COVID testing, having to go get tests for various reasons when you've been exposed and whatnot. And they wore me down on the information that they require, because for years, whenever I would go to the walk-in clinic, I would not give my social security number. They would ask me for my social security number, and I would say, I'm not going to give it to you because you don't need it. And I'm paying cash for this, $10 physical for my children to play sports. I just want the physical, and I want to pay you, and I don't want to give you my information. And they're like, well, we have to have the information to provide the services to you. Why? And they would not know, and they would call someone else, and they would say, well, we have to have the social security number. And I would say, why? And they would say, we don't know. And then finally it would get to somebody where they would say, yeah, it's fine, just go ahead. And so I fought this battle for years. And finally, because of all my trips, I went one day and they asked me for my social security number, and I slipped up. I gave it to them. And they said, we can't find you in here. And I was like, that's impossible. I've been here a bunch of dozens of times over the years. So I must be in there. And then finally I realized that was the first time I had given them my social security number. I was like, oh, I'm in there. There's just no number. And they're like, oh, you're right. Why is it not in here? I'm like, it's a long story. But they wore me down. And that's why we don't give that information sometimes, because do we trust people with our information with all the attacks that are going on? I'm confident that the walk-in clinic has not performed an annual risk assessment, but that's another story. 97% of firms have been impacted by a cybersecurity breach in their supply chain, and 93% of firms have suffered a breach because of weaknesses in their supply chain. I think this number is so high because the major attacks that occurred through Microsoft and affected FireEye and Kaseya and SolarWinds, the managed service providers who were breached, and their clients were affected. There were thousands of businesses affected, and it was widely reported. And so we all know about the impact to the supply chain and the breaches that have happened. And so these standards like NIST are very important, that we do improve and we do expect more out of what we're doing and what our stakeholders and our business partners and everyone in the ecosystem is doing. We do need to raise our game when it comes to protecting against all of these threats. And so in revision 5, they call out in their release notes or PR release, whatever it was, some of the reasons why they updated this. And first off, they said the revision represents a multi-year effort to develop the next generation of security and privacy controls needed to strengthen and support every sector of critical infrastructure. We do need the next generation of controls to help us defend against these advancing attacks. Next, they say that these next generation controls offer a proactive and systematic approach to ensuring that critical systems components, and services are sufficiently trustworthy. And so we all do need to get better at being proactive and systematic. Far too often, we only react and we only start spending more time and effort around improving our defenses after there's been a problem. And so the controls, you'll notice in the way they've aligned them and defined them and put the framework together, that many of them can be used to be more proactive, and they're looked in that way. And then finally, it says that these next generation controls have the are meant to ensure that we have the necessary resilience to defend the economic and national security interests of the United States. We've seen the examples. When a gas pipeline is affected, it affects all of us and it affects the economy. Same thing with the food supply and with a critical vendor that serves so many businesses out there. We have to do a better job across the board in order to have more of a resilient defense against all of these things. And so let's dive into some of the changes with NIST 853. It's a widely adopted framework. Many of the other frameworks will always be mapped against it. It's widely cited and respected because of the independent nature of the framework. And so these are some of the changes that they've made to the framework itself. The first thing is the control catalog. The information security and privacy controls are now integrated into a seamless, consolidated control catalog for information systems and organizations. They have added in a new control family for supply chain risk management, and that is a whole other webinar. That's a whole other topic that is very important and very relevant for some of the risk that we're facing today. But revision 5 establishes a new supply chain risk management control family and integrates SCRM aspects throughout the catalog. So that's something new to note within it. And then latest intelligence, and this is the main thing that we're going to focus on today in regard to penetration testing. New state of the practice controls are based on the latest threat intelligence and cyber attack data. We have to be aware of what the trends are and what the latest threats are. We have to have a way to stay knowledgeable about those things if we are even going to be able to defend against them. And things are moving so rapidly that we have to have a way to tap into some of that information and intelligence gathering so that we know how to react and make changes in our environment. So we're going to pull out some of those things in our conversation today. And then finally, something that I think is clearer in the framework, and it was one of the intents of what they were doing, is understanding requirements versus controls. This is a control framework, and you use this framework to select controls, and it does not mean that you would select every control for your environment. Our businesses are different, our people are different. The amount of risk that we have is different. It will be depending on your geography and the type of business you're in and who your customers are. Those things will affect risk, and so everybody's controls will be different, but we might all be trying to meet the same requirements. And there might be a law, a regulation that is demanding that we all meet the same requirements. And so there is a difference between those things. And revision 5 clarifies the relationship between requirements and controls, as well as the relationship between security and privacy controls. And so when we think about what we're doing for our penetration testing program, you know, why are we testing what we test, and why do we select the tester that we do? Is it an internal objective resource? Is it an external penetration tester? There are several key questions that we need to ask ourselves when we are addressing these information security controls. And just looking at the requirements versus controls issue here, we're saying, what controls are needed to satisfy the requirements that I am asked to fulfill? So HIPAA, for example, doesn't explicitly say thou shall do a pen test. It doesn't say that, but it talks about risk assessment, and it talks about identifying vulnerabilities, and it talks about having a way to monitor the things that you're doing that could potentially lead to a breach of PHI. And so those are the requirements that we're trying to fulfill. And so what controls are needed? Do I need penetration testing or not? If yes, how do I do it? Who do I engage for it? What's the scope of what I'm testing? That's the difference between requirements and controls. And then the second part of this, what is my mission as an organization? What are the business risks that we face? What are the risks to individuals, our employees, and our customers? Sometimes it's not a requirement that's driven externally. Sometimes it's driven internally. We don't want our reputation to be tarnished. We don't want our business to be down for a month because of ransomware. We don't want to lose revenue. We don't want to have to go through these protracted insurance battles to cover some of the expenses and costs that we have from recovery. And so we have to think about what we're trying to accomplish, and then use this control framework as a way to select the controls that are relevant and applicable for what we're doing. A lot of times I would come across other audit firms or assessors who would perform a NIST engagement for a company, and it would be all of the NIST controls. It would just be, well, you have to have all these controls in place, and we're gonna test all of them, and we're gonna ensure that you have all of them in place. And that's not the purpose of this framework. It's not to just blindly apply everything. It's to really understand what the requirements are and what your business goals are, and then use the framework to select what's right for you. And so we'll talk about a few scenarios here today. And so another key question you have to ask yourself when using this framework is, have the selected controls been implemented, or is there a plan in place to do so? I don't know any organization that is perfectly operating all of the controls. I don't know anyone who doesn't have times or reasons why a control fails and needs to be adjusted because of some change in your environment or some kind of a problem that developed. And so we have to have conversations and understand, where are we at with our control implementation? What are we doing for penetration testing? We might still be at a very basic level with what we're doing for scanning and pen testing. And as we look at some of these control enhancements today in the framework, maybe we're not doing it today. Maybe we don't have funding. Maybe we don't have the time. Maybe we don't understand the applicability of some of these more enhanced ways to perform testing on our organizations. But we have to have a plan to get there. We want to grow every year. We want to improve in what we're doing. And so are we doing the same thing that we were doing 5 years ago with our pen testing program? Or are we developing a plan that's going to help us incorporate some of these ideas that come out of the NIST 853 framework? So a very important question to ask yourself. And then another good question to ask when you're using this framework is, what is the required level of assurance that the selected controls as designed and implemented are effective? And this is really where testing comes in. And this goes beyond penetration testing. Penetration testing is good for coming to this required level of assurance that you need for, how is our externally facing firewall configured, and is it effective in doing its job? How is our cloud infrastructure configured? Have we accidentally allowed overly permissive access to data? Do we have publicly available buckets somewhere that we didn't know about? Are our users doing the right things? Are they knowledgeable enough to identify when there is an attack or something suspicious that needs to be reported? How are our endpoints performing? Like, that's why you do penetration testing is to get to that required level of assurance to know if it's effective. You can't know if you don't test it. But beyond pen testing, you have to check other controls that you put in from the NIST framework, like how are they operating, and what do we do to test them and make sure that they're doing what we expect them to do. So I wanted to show you the framework, and just for those who don't know, just kind of explain how to use it and how to read it, because I think it's 490 something pages. It's a very large document, and your eyes can glaze over real fast. But when you get down into the actual control families, they will have their reference number there. This one that I'm showing you is AT2, and this particular control is literacy, training, and awareness. And the control as it's written is made up of 4 parts. There is the control that has you providing security and privacy literacy training to system users, including managers, senior executives, and contractors. And you're doing that as part of initial training for new users and annually thereafter, for example, and when required by system changes or following significant events, incidents. These are organization defined things that you decide how to do based on your assessment of risk. But this is the control, the first part of the control, that we're going to do training when a new user comes onto our system, and whenever there's a significant change that happens, or we have some type of an incident, we're going to train on that again. The second part is we employ the following techniques to increase the security and privacy awareness of system users. And those techniques might be, what you decide to do. Are we going to do some kind of online training? Are we going to have a classroom training? Are we going to require people to read and understand some documentation? Are we going to have live tests in order to see if they understand how to apply the training that they were given? And the third part is updating the training. Some people just keep doing the same training over and over and over again, and it becomes very rote. It becomes very, just normalized, and people just have kind of moved past fully engaging in what we're trying to teach them about cybersecurity and threat awareness. But this control says we're going to update that training or content annually, for example, and we're going to update it following new information that we glean from some of the recent events that have happened and some of the recent threats that are out there that we're learning about. And so we've got to update that training to do that. And then finally, the last part of this control is incorporating lessons learned from internal or external security incidents or breaches into literacy training and awareness techniques. And so that's the control. That's what you would take and make part of your policy. That's what you would take to make part of your risk treatment plan of, okay, how are we going to address the risk of our users doing something accidental that leads to a system compromise or data being released that shouldn't have been released. And so this is the control that we're going to apply in that situation. But the framework then gives a discussion, and these are just discussion points to really understand what they mean by the control. And as you read through that, it can give you lots of help on what to do. And so, for example, they give the idea there of using posters and giving supplies with reminders and log-on screen messages and all these kinds of things that are good ideas. Then they show you the other controls in the NIST framework that this is related to, so that you can kind of connect things together and understand the relevance of it. And then down below this is the control enhancements. And when you're using NIST 853, you are applying the controls that are relevant to your assessment of risk on a low, moderate, and high scale. And so when we talk about requirements that are driven by regulatory agencies, business partners, they are typically telling you what the requirement is, and they're typically saying, we want to see these controls implemented using the low or moderate or high ranking. And so sometimes a control enhancement will apply to your requirement that you're being asked to fulfill, and sometimes it won't. But these enhancements are there for you to think about, do we need to apply this enhancement to what we're doing? Do we have a risk? Do we have something outside of this requirement that's being put on us that we want to make sure that we're addressing? Do we just want to go the extra mile and make sure that we're doing things differently? And so this is an example of an enhancement that is documented in the framework. Provide practical exercises in literacy training that simulate events and incidents. It's not part of the control description. It's added on as an enhancement. Gives you an idea here of no notice social engineering attempts. So something that is a way for us to level up our security by implementing these no notice social engineering attempts. So I'm going to give some examples of this in just a second, but I really just wanted to show you how to use the framework, because you know, if you don't understand what these headings are and you don't understand how to read this very arduous document, sometimes it just ends up on a shelf somewhere and you're not actually getting the benefit of the ideas and the discussion that they provide in the text, because it really, really is very helpful for you to design the controls that make the most sense for you. And so we're focused on these control enhancements today in our session because there are a few that specifically relate to what we can do to enhance our penetration testing program. These are new control enhancements. It's new language, and I think it's coming from a place of dealing with the latest threats and intelligence gathering that's been going on in the world. And so I want to talk a little bit more about what AT2, literacy, awareness, and training, really means. Because if these enhancements are meant to provide practical exercises in literacy training, and if it is meant to help our people recognize and report potential and actual instances of social engineering and social mining, that could go a long way to helping our organizations be more adaptive and responsive to these actual attacks that are going on out there. So I just want to give a few ideas about why these enhancements are important. First off, I'll just criticize how just lazy we've gotten on our security awareness training. You know, we give people these online modules, we give people policies to read, and is that enough now with what's going on? With some of the techniques that are very confusing and very effective technical means that are used now to trick us and evade detection, is that enough to just have our users go through online modules and policies? It's really not. That's my opinion on it. And when we look at these enhancements, let's try to think about what practical means. If I want to make that practical instead of theoretical, what kinds of things should you be doing with your employees in order to really prepare them for the threat that is hitting their inbox or their phone or their web browser every day? What kind of practical exercises would you employ? Think about other areas where, you know, if we want somebody to really nail a process, we take them through simulations, we take them through practical exercises so that they can experience what it's like, so that they can ask questions and so that they can get the follow-up to that. And so in our penetration tests, I think a lot of people just kind of throw in phishing, and they're like, well, let's just do a phishing assessment. We'll send out a few emails and see how many people click on it. But we really need to enhance that and make that more practical, and make it approximate what's actually happening out there. And that needs to be part of our pen tests. I really wish people would think of penetration tests as more than just the scans of the open ports and services and the launch of exploits to see what kind of low-hanging fruit is available. And I'd really like to see people think about a comprehensive pen test, including things for the purpose of getting engagement from people who work for our organization so that we can see how they would respond in a situation. I'll give you an example in the second enhancement here. Awareness training on recognizing and reporting potential and actual instances. We had done some reconnaissance on a company that had numerous branches that we were penetration testing. And one of the things that we discovered in our reconnaissance was that they were upgrading their switches at all of their branches. And we were able to use phone calls and emails in order to identify who was going where to deliver and install these switches. And so we sat outside of one of the branches when we knew that they were getting the new switch, and we waited for the technician to leave. And he was in there several hours, so we waited all that time for him to finish the installation. And we were wearing a shirt with a logo that would indicate that we worked for the same company as the person who just installed the switch. And we walked in to the branch and we said, hey, was Bob here earlier putting the switch in? And there were these two sweet ladies. They were retirement age, looked like they were working part-time at the branch, enjoying the life of branch work. And it was so laid back and nice in there. And they looked at us and they turned into absolute monsters in defending against accessing the network closet. And they said, who are you? And we said, oh, we're with so-and-so. And they said, well, we were told that the one guy was coming, but we didn't know that you guys were coming. The other lady was like, yeah, that's right. And they had gotten shoulder to shoulder to defend against this suspicious action that was going on. And so we're like, it's going to be real quick. We just have to check the switch. He asked us to stop by and check. And they said, no, we're gonna have to call somebody, and we're going to have to know if you're authorized to be here or not. So these two ladies did an excellent job in being suspicious and recognizing that this was a potential. We could have been legitimate, but they recognized that it could have been a potential instance of social engineering. And I have to think, I don't know what training they've been through, but clearly they've been through some training. And so we did not get in that day. And so we used that example in some of the follow-up for all the other employees to provide further awareness that this is exactly how you behave. You question, if you weren't notified about this, if you weren't given approval to do this, you stop and you contact the appropriate person. Now, we did find out subsequently that they did not report the issue. And so even though they successfully defended against this penetration test, they did not report it to anyone. And as a result, they missed an opportunity to provide awareness to all the other branches. Because what if we had been a malicious person who was going, to different branches and trying this? It would have been very beneficial for their awareness training to have taught them to make sure you report it, because we're going to send out a picture from the security camera, and we're going to get that distributed to all the branches, and we're going to say, hey, beware, there's someone showing up at the branches trying to get in to the network closet, and they're not authorized to do that, and here's the process for checking and making sure. And so that test produced a need for that organization to do a better job on making sure people understood the follow through that's necessary, but it also served as validation that their training had been very effective, and they did a great job in stopping what we were there to do when we were trying to get into the network closet. And so those are examples of enhancements. Like, are you doing those kinds of tests, or are we just from the outside trying to access that infrastructure at that branch? Is it time to enhance that and see, like, okay, how are our controls actually performing, and are there areas of improvement so that we can level up our security as a result of the tests that we're doing? And so this is the discussion point that's in this AT2 control. Social engineering, it's an attempt to trick an individual into revealing information. It includes phishing, pretexting, impersonation, baiting, quid pro quo. That's what we were trying to do. It wasn't simply the technical attempts to access that organization. We used impersonation and a pretext in order to get information and try to get into a place where we weren't supposed to be. I am a big believer in this as part of your pen testing program. I'll tell one more story about this, about the use, and I'm going to focus on tailgating here. Such a simple thing to do in order to get into a secured area, and people are always surprised at how easy it can be to tailgate someone into a secure area. But one time we were doing an engagement where we were talking to the senior vice president of risk and the CISO, and we were talking about scope. We were talking about, what kind of places do you want us to visit, and what objectives are we trying to achieve here with the test? And they were kind of talking amongst themselves, and myself and another individual were sitting on the other side of the table, and they said they were talking to each other and said, well, they're not gonna get in the data center, so let's not do that. And so we looked at each other and we were like, well, then we obviously have to try to go to the data center, because they're sitting there thinking you can't get in the data center, so we're not going to waste our time going there. And we're thinking, well, then if that's how you feel about your controls at the data center, they absolutely have to be tested to see if they're operating as effectively as you think they are. And all we used was tailgating. We carried a box, and inside the box was a keyboard with a keylogger on it. We had some other key logging devices in the box, and we waited till lunchtime when there was more traffic going in and out, and they had a two-part locked door going in the front of the data center. This was a private data center. It was their data center. It wasn't a co-location or anything like that. And we just, as people were filing back from lunch, we got behind some people with our box, and they opened the door and they let us go in. We walked around unattended. We planted the keyboard and another keylogger, and we found an open room that had some tapes sitting outside of the rack that had the tape backup devices. The door was not locked. We took some of the tapes, put them in the box, and we exited the building. And then we doubled back to the place a little bit later to give the tapes back to the manager. And she was horrified. How did you get these? Where did you, and she had a false sense of security about the data center. She thought that their perimeter defenses were strong, and as a result, they did not have the practice of locking their racks and locking up the tapes. And she immediately locked them as we were giving her the tapes back. But that was part of their comprehensive pen test, and not very many people do that. They do have a false sense of security that, well, we just need to test from the outside because internally all of these things would have to happen. I hear that all the time, when we talk about risk to and reasons to test these internal things. Well, that's not realistic because all these things would have to happen. You would have to get on the inside. But if we're able to use pretexting or impersonation or tailgating in order to do that, then those internal controls then become very important. And we have to think about enhancing the types of penetration tests that we're doing in order to really figure out, is our awareness where it needs to be? Are people recognizing the potential of this person with the box not being someone legitimate and allowing them to walk around and pick up things and no one noticing that and no one challenging? These are tests that absolutely need to be confirmed. One of the things, by the way, I'm just going to throw this in real quick. One of the things that's happening with all of the work from home, and you know, we're constantly getting, hey, do you want to do these tests? No, no one's in the office, and so there's no reason to do these tests. I really want to change people's thinking on that, because there's more of a reason to do those tests now, because when people were in the office, there was more potential for someone to challenge a stranger or challenge someone who was suspicious. And what we're finding more often than not, when people are like, there's no one in the office, there are people in the office. There are a few people. There are people going in, and when you do have an office and there's still just one or two, there's so few people in the office now that the risk of a stranger or a malicious person actually, you know, entering your office or doing something to get into your office for malicious purposes, that's actually increased. And so we need to test. First of all, we need to implement controls in order to protect those environments. But we also have to test what's happening, because our risk has changed there. And I'm afraid too many people are saying, well, it's not relevant anymore because everybody's home. We need to do different types of tests because everyone is home, but we shouldn't forget the office, because there's still stuff going on there if you do have an office. Okay, let's go to one of the other enhancements that I think relates to penetration testing, and this is CA7. This is a continuous monitoring control, and this is to develop a continuous monitoring strategy and implement continuous monitoring in accordance with what the organization's strategy is. And we're talking here about trend analysis. Continuous monitoring, you know, such a difficult thing to do, but if we are concerned about all of the emerging threats and we're concerned about all of the attacks that are happening out there, we have to come up with a way to do continuous monitoring. You know, do we only think about threats and attacks and risk during a once a year process where we you know, maybe update our policies and update our training or something like that? Or is there a way for us to do that more continuously? The enhancement is saying that we need to employ trend analyses to determine if control implementations, the frequency of continuous monitoring activities, and the types of activities used in the continuous monitoring process need to be modified based on empirical data. I'm here to say, again, just sharing my opinion, once a year, updating our programs once a year is not enough. We have to stay abreast of what's happening to the people in our industry, the people in our city, the technology changes that are happening. It's a big ask. It's a huge thing that's going on, and we need to leverage the resources that we have at our disposal to improve our continuous monitoring in this area. And there are lots of resources. We just have to get on the stick and actually start using them. And so one of the things that is said in the discussion here under this control for continuous monitoring is that we should be examining recent threat information that have occurred in the organization or the federal government, the success rates of certain types of attacks. Like, if we have really done a good job of addressing phishing, and we have trained on that, and we understand that, you know, this is going to be a constant threat, and it's like a constant thing, and there's going to be a few that get through, and we've got these controls that are identifying those and stopping them, and we have our procedures for you know, responding and recovering from those kinds of attacks. If we've matured in that area and we're doing a good job, well, now the success rate on that has gone down. So now we need to move some of our attention and resources to other types of threats that maybe aren't happening as often, but they can be more damaging and more successful. And all these things come from analyzing threat information. We don't have the time for that, right? It's hard to actually take time out to figure out where we need to put our resources and our time. But I want to recommend that we think about external resources, and that we do carve out time to connect with people who can help us. Because I think the bottom line on this is I see so many organizations trying to do all this themselves. Like, yeah, I get this weekly email from this source that tells me things, and yeah, I attend a webinar once a year, and we have a once a year pen test, and all you're doing is putting it on yourself to do it all. But we've got to get to a point where we are engaging with other people who can help us, and that might be one of the enhancements in this control is engaging assessors and engaging external parties who can help you with this continuous monitoring. And that's where we're at. We need strong cybersecurity partnerships now in all of our businesses to make sure that someone is helping us with this, and we have somebody to talk to and discuss, you know, what it is that we should be doing as an organization. And if you look at the NIST cybersecurity framework, they call this Tier 4, an adaptive organization that has matured, and it's the top level of the mature organization. The lowest level is someone who's reactive. They're reacting to things that are happening to them. And as you go from Tier 1 to Tier 4, you are this adaptive organization that is proactively engaging with external parties to understand the risk that you're facing and get ahead of some of the issues. And so, are you connected with people in your industry, even if they're competitors? You know, when it comes to cybersecurity, we all are on the same team, and we all need to work together in defending our industry against the threats that are facing us. Are we engaging with law enforcement and other government resources that are providing programs to our particular industry? That's really what an adaptive Tier 4 organization looks like in the NIST cybersecurity framework. And so when it comes to continuous monitoring, you may be a long way from being like that. You need to take some baby steps, but eventually you need to make plans to be there, to have achieved this Tier 4 type of model when it comes to continuous monitoring, because our businesses and the obligations that we have for protecting data and having strong and effective companies really is dependent on us really conquering this cybersecurity problem. And so a few things that I got from the Uber list of cybersecurity resources. It's a great website that lists out a lot of resources and books and classes and things like that. But there are membership programs. You can join the FBI InfraGard program. They have sectors. So like if you're in healthcare, you can be in the healthcare sector, and you can find out, what are you doing for penetration testing, and how do you do your tests, and what kinds of things do you test? And you can really learn a lot about how to enhance your pen testing by talking to other people. The Cyber Threat Alliance is an organization that allows you to join and share intelligence data. That can be a great way to understand what threats are out there and then apply that to your penetration testing program. The Cyber Information Sharing and Collaboration Program, which is a program that was created by CISA. That's a way to get information from the federal government about threats that we need to be aware of, and again, use that to adjust what you're doing for penetration testing. Getting information from CVE and Internet Storm Center and US CERT. You've got to be plugged into these if you are going to be a tier 4 organization and if you want to enhance what you're doing with penetration testing, because I find people just doing the same thing every year, the same tests. They're just knocking their head against the same wall every time, and they're not changing, they're not adapting, they're not incorporating new things to say, hey, let's test this. Can this kind of thing happen to us? And so finally, the last area of enhancement that I want to talk about is in CA8, which is the penetration testing control. And this is the control where you are conducting penetration testing on some frequency, on some scope of assets that you have in your organization. And the new enhancements are red team exercises and facility testing. A red team approach is different from the, hey, here's our web app pen test. Hey, here's our network pen test. Here's our vulnerability scan result. A red team exercise is where you hire a team of people who are simulating being an adversary to try to compromise your system. And so I want to give you a specific idea here about how this is different from maybe what we think about in terms of our pen tests. A lot of times I see pen tests where it starts off with, okay, here's the contract that I've signed, and here are the IP addresses that I want you to test, go. And that's the pen test. And so it gets put into this box, you know, the box is a list of IP addresses. Well, what if there's information, like for example, one time we did some reconnaissance and we realized that a key network engineer for an organization was going to be out of the office for a week because he had posted online that he was at his college reunion, and he was in this group where they were talking about all the wonderful fun that they were going to have at the college reunion, and he was going to be out. And our group of people, when we did that, we used that information in order to get access outside of what our customer thought we should be able to get access to, because they were just thinking about the externally facing IP addresses. But the red team was able to figure out that, hey, there's a weakness here. This key individual is distracted with his college reunion. And we used that in order to get more information and more information and more information until there was a complete compromise. Another example was when we were doing a test for a manufacturing firm, and they said, yeah, we want this to be anything goes. We want a blank slate. We just want to see what somebody from the outside can do. And there were no limitations put on us. And so one of the very first things we did was we called the help desk in order to just find out what the process was for getting access externally to different resources. And on that very first call, the help desk was so helpful that they said, oh, you're a new employee? Let me email you the instructions for connecting to the company VPN. They emailed it to a Gmail address, and embedded in the PowerPoint that they sent us was the group password for the VPN. And so then all we needed was a set of credentials, which we were able to easily get through other means. And we connected to that VPN. And that was about a 2-month engagement. And we stayed connected to that VPN the entire 2 months. They never ended our session. They never knew that we were accessing the intranet and some of the internal resources. We were able to try different sets of credentials with different permissions, and that happened because there was a team of people that was simulating what an adversary would do. And so these red team exercises can be very creative and help you realize ways that you're vulnerable that don't come out of your standard annual penetration test. Facility. One time I'm very good at just accidentally accessing things. I walked off of an elevator and opened the front door in an office building into their front. There was no visitor person there, no receptionist, and so I just walked through the through the company, and I finally found my contact's office. I asked a couple people, where this person's office was, finally got there. And he was like, did you sign in? No, I didn't. There wasn't anybody at the front. And he was like, how did you get in? And I was like, I just opened the door. And he said, that's impossible. The door is locked. And I said, well, it was not locked when I went through. And so we go to the front and he shows me, he's like, see, it's locked. And I was like, that's weird. It just opened for me when I pulled on it. And he goes, there's no way. And so he didn't believe me. We went to the video, pulled the video, and he saw that I got in. Well, it took us about 30 minutes to figure out what was going on, but finally we realized the angle off of the elevator, like when you came into the hallway to the door, it was locked, it wouldn't open. But when you come off the elevator, you kind of angled towards the door and it triggered the motion sensor. And so the door opened for me. And so they called the door vendor or whatever, the access control vendor, I guess, that day, and got them to, tweak the setting on the motion sensor. But those things have to be tested. You have to put that into your penetration testing program, because you can sometimes just find something like that you weren't expecting. We've had lots of situations where we just pulled on a door and it opened when it wasn't supposed to. And so those faulty controls and understanding that the controls are not operating effectively could be very good finds. I know I'm running out of time here, but I want to just point out the discussion about these red team exercises that, it's an examination of your security posture. And if our pen tests have become stale because we're no longer examining what we're doing, we're no longer questioning, we're no longer pushing, we're just following a standard that we created a few years ago about what we expect penetration tests to be, it's time to use some of these enhancements in NIST 853 in order to really improve what we're doing and rethink cybersecurity. Because with so many new threats and new risks that we're facing, and a change in the workforce, and a change in the location of the workforce, a change in the technologies that we're using, more and more cloud capabilities, different expectations, different training, all these things have to be put to the test. And as the discussion says here, you need to reflect real world conditions. And that's what I want to challenge everybody today to think about as you read some of these new enhancements in the framework. How can we simulate real world conditions and do a better job and actually learn something, actually get something out of our test that causes us to change our controls? It actually causes us to improve our controls. That's why we're doing a pen test. I know people sometimes get their results and they hate that they have to make changes, but that's why we're doing it, so that we can make changes and improve and adjust against all the things that are happening out there. So I hope some of these ideas about social engineering and continuous analysis and red team assessments and facility testing will help you enhance your penetration testing program. I want to end here with the screen that has Amelia's email address on it, a.lewis@KirkpatrickPrice.com. Anyone who dropped a question into the chat, you'll get a personal response to those questions. And if you do think of anything that you want to ask us or reach out to us about, please don't hesitate to contact us. We would love to help you improve your penetration testing program. So thanks very much for joining today.